What is protective anonymity? You talk about that in your book, so maybe explain that to us and how that relates with this.
Yeah. Well, this is something that what I found New Testament scholars discussing this idea all the way back to the time of the Reformation, but they don't necessarily use that phrase. That phrase, Richard Bauckham says it's I think it's Gerd Thiessen who coins that particular phrase. But as I'm investigating things around this idea, it goes back a long, long way. So the best um, example of protective anonymity, I think, is the scene in which, um, you got that scene in the Garden of Gethsemane when Peter hacks off the high priest's servant's ear.
Yeah.
Now, only one of the three gospels records the name Peter. Mark's gospel, most New Testament scholars agree, is basically Peter's gospel. It's Mark was Peter's secretary. He records what Peter had said. So clearly, Peter would know who is the quote disciple who took up a sword and chopped off the servant's ear. So going all the way back again, 500 years, every time that scene is mentioned, what you find is that Peter's name was kept out of the record because they wanted to protect him from, putting a
Right.
crime in the public document that he could later be tried for. He was in and out of prison. Okay, and so you find that idea in uh, New, conservative New Testament scholars, liberal, moderate. They are discussing this idea of protective anonymity that sometimes a person's name is kept out of the record. Another plausible case is Lazarus. Why is he only mentioned in John's gospel since he's so crucial to the narrative? His story actually explains why there's such a large crowd of people arriving in Jerusalem to greet Jesus on Palm Sunday
Hmm.
because they had seen it. His gospel explains it. But so if he's so important, then why didn't he get a mention in the Synoptics? Well, that's John's gospel also explains that too, because the Pharisees were so uh, upset about all these things, they wanted to put not just Jesus to death, but Lazarus too. Wanted to put him to death, and so, in other words, he probably went into hiding. And a lot of the earlier gospels decided not to tell his story because it was too sensitive. Well, late John being one of the later gospels, he's writing this at a time when it was safer. And I bring this up because I think this fits with the Joanna narrative as well.
Yeah.
She is not mentioned by the other gospel writers, and she has. There seems to be um, this. There's a Herodian attack that you find out in the book of Acts in the early 40s. So there's a persecution. James, the brother of John, is killed. Peter's put in prison. It's funny if you go to that part of Acts 12, it says that Peter, once he escapes from prison, it's a dramatic scene of a jailbreak. He tells the disciples where what happened to him, and then Luke simply says, and then he went to another place.
Mm.
In other words, it leaves his location out of the record
Yeah.
because, again, too sensitive to reveal. So that kind of thing is when you start looking for it, you find it in a lot
Oh,
of
I
places.
could I just thought of a couple examples as you were talking, but back to Joanna, so that would be to protect her from any backlash from Herod, essentially, is what you're saying.
Yeah. So if she was a disciple of Jesus at a time in which, you're right now, she's still in Herod's court. It may be in light of the fact that a new Herod had come in charge. Uh, when Matthew and Mark were written, maybe it's too sensitive to mention, so we just don't tell her story. Luke,
Mhm.
maybe something has changed. She's left the country. It's now safe. So
Yeah.
that's at least a plausible explanation for why her story. Since it seems like she would be a person you'd want to talk about more, that
Yeah.
could explain why she's just only mentioned in these two verses.
Yeah, interesting. The couple of examples I was thinking of, I don't know if this would totally qualify because it wouldn't be necessarily to protect from any sort of repercussions, but you have we read this on the midweek with Jeremiah in John 20 when it says, the one who Jesus loved, and Simon Peter. So this is in the book of John. So this is John writing. So he's writing about himself, and he's talking about how it says, so Peter went out with the other disciple, and they were going toward the tomb. Both of them were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter. That's John talking about himself, and reached the tomb first. And of course, Peter goes in first. But is that kind of like a way of also being used to stay humble so that you're not bragging about yourself? Do you think that's what's going on in the John passage there, maybe?
Some have argued that, and I see it as a one of the most important examples of protective anonymity. I mean, if
Okay.
when Luke tells that story, he only mentions Peter.
Yeah.
He mentions the fact that Peter is the only one disciple. He doesn't say the only one, but he said Peter left. Well, there's a reason why the other disciple was left out of the narrative, and then in John's narrative, he doesn't even mention his name. We have to do some triangulating to figure out
Hmm.
who he is. And so I've written some things on that topic as well. That's the fact that, and for my money, the best explanation for the anonymity that you find regarding John, he doesn't put his name in there because he was given the custody of Jesus' mother. And so he's got to protect her. And we're not going to sort of let it be clear exactly who he is in that public narrative. The church members throughout
Yeah.
the area know who it is, but we're not going to put it in this, disclose the name in that narrative.
Interesting. And then, of course, you have in Mark the young man that fled naked that some people think was Mark. Is that maybe another example?
It could be if it's connected to Mark. There are a lot of, and that's one of those speculations that I don't think there's enough to make a strong conclusion about. But it's certainly, if you're the guy who goes around naked, I mean, maybe you don't want your name associated with that.
So, like protective embarrassment and
Right, right,
anonymity. Yeah, yeah.
right.